Hey, it's my great pleasure to introduce the producer, the writer, and director of Daughter, a movie that was intense and terrified me. I've seen it twice. Hello, Corey from Down Under.
Hey, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
No worries at all. My pleasure talking to you. Have you ever been to Australia for any reason?
I have not. I've not. It's a place that I do want to visit, but I've not been yet.
We'll put it on your agenda, okay? Because it's a great place to be, and there's a lot of good movies get made
Yeah,
down here.
I saw. We daughter premiered at Fright Fest, and I got to see Sissy there and met Kane and Hannah, that team. So that was really cool.
Oh, look, I had a chat to Hannah about Sissy, and it was in my top 10 movies for
Yeah,
last year. It was impressive.
yeah. I really enjoyed that one. I'm glad I got to meet those guys.
Maybe you can join, get together and do an anthology. You never know,
Hey,
right?
yeah.
Firstly, with Daughter, your movie that is now released, please tell me it's not based on a true story, is it?
Not directly, although that
Oh,
title card, based on more fact and fiction, there is truth to that. I would see in the news these, kidnappings, a father who would chain his family up in his house and stuff like that. Like I didn't make those elements of it up. Like that's stuff
right.
that's really out there that people are doing to each other.
So you took those elements and just broadened it into your own screenplay and thought, well, I'm going to terrify people here.
Yeah, sometimes the reality is a little bit more terrifying than the fiction. So
Would you say you took a few chances by making an obscure, not really straightforward thriller? Because I'd call it more of a thriller maybe than a horror.
yeah, absolutely. I knew from day one this was going to be a pretty wild swing. We wanted to go out and try something and not really knowing what the response to it was going to be. It's
Yeah,
actually been really surprising to me that so many people have been reviewing the film positively, that people really like it, and even in audiences too, because it's really slow paced and deliberate and ambiguous. And that's not really everybody's thing these days. So it's been really cool to see how positive the response has been.
so that surprises you with positive responses. Were you expecting negative, or do you take notice of, reviewers, journalists and film critics and so forth? Does that mean a lot to you, what they say?
In the case of this film, I would say yes. Like I didn't go into it hoping that I would, please critics or please audience necessarily. For
Yeah,
me,
yeah,
and I think for our team, for Vivien, who was day one as a part of this, for us it was really just about expressing ourselves and making something we wanted to make, and for her, the role that she wanted to be as number one, star of the film,
yeah.
and then for me, being able to create something weird and out there, experimental, build my footprint as a director that I could hope to bring on to larger projects. It wasn't really about how it was going to be received. We just felt that it needed to exist. And so before anybody saw the film, we made our own piece with it and say, it is what it is. There were things that we like about it, things that we don't like about it. I
Yeah.
look back at it as a director and say, man, I totally fucked that shot up. I wish I would have done something different. But now it's like, it's out there in the world. And I've been reading the reviews just out of curiosity,
Okay.
because like, if there were certain things that I would have wanted someone to like about the film, it's kind of cool to see somebody review it and cite those things and say, oh, I love this element of it or that. Like that's been really cool to see. And the negative reviews, if there's something that I thought someone would hate about the film, that's what's getting put out in the negative review. So it's like it's kind of cool to see that I feel like I have achieved the goal that I set out with to make with it.
The only negative thing I could probably say about it is the first time I watched it, it made a bit more sense the second time. I was scratching my head. What is going on? What's their backstory? Why is he doing this? It wasn't explained, so it was left to your imagination, I guess.
Yeah. And that was deliberate. It was,
Yeah,
the intention was to not necessarily pose questions without answering them, but to try to create a framing of the film where the audience would receive it almost in the way that the daughter character does, because
yeah,
she doesn't know the answer to some of those questions, and she, in the end of it, is going to be left without those answers. And I wanted to see the audience in that perspective to say, sometimes that's kind of what life is. You just have to take what comes and deal with it, and you're not going to always get that definitive, binary yes or no closure
right.
at the end.
Yeah, and you sort of had that opening scene to set even more, mysterious things. You're thinking, well, how do they get there? They're outside, and then it circles back, of course. So that was well intentioned. I'm assuming. Did you always plan it that way?
Yeah. I mean, knowing that I was going to do something that was very deliberately slow paced and very, methodical and more drama than horror, I would say, in the middle chunks of it.
Exactly.
I wanted to tease out that threat of violence early on, so the audience does have that expectation that we're going to get back there. It might take a while, but we're going to get back to something like that, and see how long I could stretch that tension throughout the film. And letting that be the one piece of information that the audience has that daughter doesn't necessarily. Like, she doesn't exactly know what happens if she doesn't obey all the rules. She's gotten the threat, but she hasn't seen it the way we've seen it.
Yeah, that's right. As an audience member, you're coming back to that, but then you almost forget when it does actually happen. You forget that happened at the start because you've been so involved in the lead up. And I want to ask you about the isolated set. It seemed like an isolated set, right? So was it more intense for the actors? Did they stay in character? Did it cause tension because of the isolated set? It seemed to work.
Yeah, it worked. I think we all got a little bit of cabin fever in there.
I thought so.
Nobody was like super method, staying in character the whole time. The second the cameras would cut, we'd all be joking and like laughing at everything. Casper's telling dad jokes all day. Like it was a really like fun, relaxed environment, even in the middle of the chaos of production. But I mean, the house was a lot smaller even than it looks in the film, because we shot everything as wide as we possibly could. Those were really, really tiny, some of them. And so I think everybody was definitely feeling that by the end, like, yeah, this is fun, but we cannot wait to get out of here.
So it was an actual house, not a set that you had built?
Right, this was a house. Making the film on a micro budget, it was contingent that we had to find a location that worked for everything.
Sure.
And we got really lucky with the house.
Now, you mentioned Casper telling bad jokes. I'll get to him, but Vivien.
Oh, bad jokes.
Maybe
he's telling bad jokes, his father, yeah.
Maybe when I talk to him, I can suggest he tells me one of his bad jokes, and I'll decide whether it's bad. But before I get to him, I want to speak about your core cast as well as him. But Vivien, I'll start with her. I've not heard of, other than Casper, I've got to say, wasn't aware of any of your cast members, but now I am, and they're on my radar. So first, Vivien, how did you cast her? Did you know her previously?
Yeah, her and I had already been friends for years.
Oh, good.
Sorry?
Oh, that's good, because she trusts you, obviously.
Yeah, that is. For that, I mean, again, like not everything was like super methodical, but she was chained to that floor for a while. We had to, so it does take a certain level of trust to be able to like just sit there in that space. But her and I had already knew each other, and through her, because Vivien and Elyse had played mother-daughter before on a show called Queen Sugar that Ava DuVernay made. And so I'd been introduced to Elyse, I think once or twice before already.
Yeah.
Ian, I'd been introduced to already before, and I was familiar with Ian's work from the OA, from the Netflix series from a while back.
Yeah, okay.
And so they were kind of, part of the project from day one as well. I wrote the script knowing that it was going to be Vivien, Ian, and Elyse in those roles.
Is that right? So you wrote it around them. And with Ian, were there any directives to make him weird and unlikable, or was that just all in the script? Because it worked. I just didn't like his presence. I wanted him off the screen.
I mean, we definitely wanted to lean into creepy, and that kind of just like sheltered child, doesn't know anything about the world, only has father here as this role model, and start to, exhibit some of those behaviors.
Was it intentional, or did you ever have ideas of having them have names, or was it always going to be mother, father, daughter, son?
I think it was always that. Like there is a little Easter egg in the film about what daughter's name really is. Like you will see it there.
No.
But in terms of how they are referred to in the house, it was always intentional that we would not know anything beyond what their role was going to be in the family, essentially, because it was all going to be about those familial relationships.
You're going to make me watch it a third time to see this Easter egg. I did not spot it. There you go. The music. Was it David Strother who was the composer? Yeah. That also, as it does with all movies, really upped levels. Had you worked with him before? Did you help write any music? Are you musically inclined? Because it was quite a good soundtrack.
Thanks. Yeah, no. Almost 95% of the sounds that you hear in the film, including the room tones, the ambience, all of that is David Strother and an electric violin.
Yeah.
And so he and I hadn't worked together before. We've been talking about working together for about a year prior to that.
Right.
I do have a music background where I grew up playing piano and drums and sax, and I would write and compose like all of that stuff for a while. So music is always the first place that I start when I'm writing anything. Like I'll know what a film will sound like before I even sit down and figure out what the story is.
Really?
That helps my creative process. The mood, because there's such an emotional connection to music, what it sounds like will inform the tone, will inform the mood, will then inform the story. So I always try to build from that place. And out of pure coincidence, I was visiting an art gallery here in LA one day to check out some paintings from a different artist I was working with on something else.
Yeah.
And when I walk in, I see David setting up this violin, thinking like, oh, okay, cool. We're gonna have some live music tonight. That's pretty neat. But I start walking around the gallery, and it had to have been at least like 15, 20 minutes later, I realized that, wait a minute, the music already started. I didn't even register the beginning of it. It's just become part of the atmosphere of this room now.
It's blended.
Incredible sound that I've never heard before. And I didn't even register that it was the guy with the violin who I'd walked by. It's just like, where is this sound coming from? And I'm searching all like, where is it a CD? Like what is this? And then I finally walk back out to that first room, and there he is with the violin into this array of guitar pedals, like all analog guitar pedals that he would create loops and modulate the sound and change it and add reverb and add delay and echoes, like all this kind of stuff, making this orchestra out of instruments that don't exist, and just him with the electric violin. So right there, I'm like, okay, we need to exchange info because that is going to be in a film. I don't know what, my daughter was still a year off. I wasn't even thinking about that at all.
But you knew.
Yeah, there was a different film I was working on at the time, and I thought, okay, maybe he'll do the soundtrack for this one. That one didn't end up panning out. But a year later, as I start to put together what Daughter could be, knowing that I wanted to do something that was a little weird and a little experimental, thought, I know exactly what this is. Called up David. It's like, I told him the concept of it. I don't think I had a script yet. And he's like, yeah, I'm on board. And he was like, the first crew member essentially as a part of it. So we went out and made the film. I kept him kind of in the loop on what we were doing. And then once we had our first assembly cut, or maybe even some early scenes, he and I would start some conversations about what it could sound like. And we ended up doing a series of recording sessions where it was just like the two of us and our recording engineer, Michael Gale,
right,
who David has worked with a lot. I think Michael mixed some of his albums in the past. And our process was just, we would play a scene of the film. I'd give David a little bit of direction, just like, we want to start with some bass maybe as the father comes in, and let him do what he does. And he'll improv something based on the movement of the camera or the actor. And I was like, oh yeah, that's really cool. Now let's lay that track down. Michael will do a little like preliminary mix on it. And then, all right, as the other character comes in, now let's try something into treble. And we would just kind of build layer by layer. I would take those recordings from the sessions back into the edit and then start changing what the actual score would be, and still try to like retain his improvisational style by virtue of not letting any two pieces of music be exactly the same throughout the film. So even the little repeating melodies and recurring motifs would be a little bit different each time you'd hear them, to try to keep this living, breathing feel of our actual workflow of making the score. And that was, to me, like my favorite part of the entire thing was being able to do that.
Your favorite part? Well, that's a big call. I mean, I could hear the humming. There was humming. There was almost like it was in your ears while the movie was going. And you think about some of the greats, strings are always involved. Psycho, The Shining, always got this weird string section. So yeah, you built on that. And I'm really glad that you've got a musical inclined background, because you can tell like you've done well.
Yeah, like David and I had such a great workflow of just like speaking musically on what we were going to do. It was great.
Casper, did you know him? I mean, he's a busy man, and to nail him down for this role, something I've not seen him do before. Was he all for it? Did you have to talk him into it? How did you get Casper on board?
Yeah, we sent the script to him.
Simple as that.
Came up, by somebody on our team had worked with him before and recommended him, and I thought like, oh yeah, actually, that's kind of perfect, because I wanted somebody against type. I didn't want somebody he would think would be just the stereotypical bad guy.
Yeah, true.
Everything with Casper, you associate Johnny Rico, you associate action hero, all this stuff. And like, that's perfect, because I want the audience to be incorrect in their assumption of the character going into what he was going to do, and then be surprised by the action and the style of performance, knowing it would be a little different than what you'd expect him to do.
Sure.
And so we sent a script to him, and he loved it right away. Like, he was so intrigued by it. I think just by curiosity of like what all the meaning of everything was, and I think excited by the challenge of it for him to take on a role like that. And he ended up, I want to say he even like pushed back a different project he was going to do so that he could fit this into his schedule. Because we got him, he had pretty much walked off the plane on Wednesday, and then Thursday he's on our set for 2 weeks, and the day we wrap, he's back to fly off to another project. It's like we got like a perfect little window for him.
I'm glad to hear that. Against type works. As a director, did you have to sort of coax him along to being that dark, sinister character, or did he nail it straight away? There would have been a few marks he had to hit.
Yeah, I think it was a little bit of both. Like, he came in with a sense of what to do, but because we didn't get to rehearse with him a lot because he was booked on something else, there was a little moment early on where we had to find what it was. And I think the experimental nature of the film really aided us there, because from the gate, I wasn't really pushing toward naturalism necessarily in the performance or anything. So we had a chance to be able to find it and shape it. And it worked out that some of the first things that we shot with him were some of the later things in the film, where the character had already been changed a little bit by daughter's presence. And so there's moments in the performance that you'll see feel a little different, but it looks like he's being affected by daughter in that way. And it worked out perfectly, because once we found the core of, who he's supposed to be from the beginning, then we actually shot the beginning elements of it. So it's like, it was a kind of a cool process to put together. It just sort of worked out really well in our shoot schedule.
10 Cloverfield Lane was a movie that it reminded me of. I don't know if that was intentional. I know it's different stories, but that sort of similar premise had me thinking. Was that any part of your writing? Did you sort of base it on that maybe a little bit?
Not to base it on, but I looked at that. Looked at films like It Comes at Night, Dog, another one, like the Lanthimos stuff in general. I sort of like tent poles of what to do with minimalism, like what to do when you don't have a lot of locations and you are in a genre where you really want to play up dramatic tension between characters, like films like that do it so well, like The Blueprint.
Well, it worked, and you set it out on your own. It's very unique. Couple of quick questions before we wrap up. Do you have a director's chair with your name on it?
I do now. I got it as a gift actually from Vivien after we wrapped this shoot. That was the wrap gift to me. I didn't have on the set though. We didn't have time to sit down ever, so we're just always on the move. But
that's good to hear that you were busy on set. So you're not a director that sits around with a cigar.
Yeah, exactly.
It's funny, just as a fun fact, a lot of first time or second time directors say to me they do now. They've never had one, but they do now because it's a gift of usually an actor in their movie. Yeah. The movie that you said you were working on before Daughter, but hasn't happened yet, is that now going to, materialize, or have you got other things on the agenda that you can tell me about? Any exclusives?
Yeah, well, there will be some other things first. So like that film that I was working on that I thought was going to be the first film I directed at the time is something that was actually going to shoot in North Africa. That I'm still planning. It's a bit of a like contemporary Western with some magical realism elements built into it.
Okay.
That one I am still planning to do, but it's a little bit on the back burner now because that wasn't going to be thriller genre.
Yeah.
But now that I have started with Daughter, there's some other things that I want to play around with in the genre first before I do anything else. So the next film is going to be another contained thriller, something I'm hoping to set up this year.
Bigger budget, maybe?
Yeah. still low budget, but bigger budget.
And did you come in?
I was saying, if we take the budget of Daughter and multiply it by 30, we still are in the low budget range in terms of like the unions out here. So I got a little ways to go in low budget before I look for anything bigger.
That's what impresses me so much. You can admit how low that budget was on Daughter, but you managed to make something that just keeps ascending and will stand the test of time, I'm sure.
Thanks. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for your time. Maybe you can work together with David again on like a musical horror film. You know, that'd be good.
Yeah, that'd be fun. I think there's definitely going to be some other collaborations in the future. Like that work process with him inspired me to get back into music again, because I had been kind of walked away from it for a little while, just out of necessity, really. But being that hands-on with music again is like, oh yeah, I grew up doing it. I give myself like now. Now we'll see. Maybe there'll be some musical collaborations with us in the future.
Just go easy on the saxophone, because I watch a lot of those 80s and 90s movies and there's so much saxophone. I'm over it.
The old Lethal Weapon soundtrack, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you, mate. I've stopped recording.